So we are live. Hello everyone. Today we are going to cover Redux in detail. Let first Razia add up something.
Okay, the issue is we want an application which has a state. By state, I mean the data which is shown on the screen. Now you can think of these things. The data which is shown on the screen, there are two parts to it. One is the data and what is being shown on the screen. What is being shown on the screen are the React components, which is a component tree, which is basically a base root component, and under the root component there are many other components, nested components. That is the view. The model is the state. When they have to be, what we want to do is basically we have functionality right now. Initially there was no functionality of basically storing state in React, but right now we have use state, we have use context and the rest of the stuff. But the issue is when the application becomes big, it will become very complicated. We want to separate the view from the data, that is the state. We want to separate it, both of them. Otherwise, it will become very difficult to debug the application. Once it becomes even a medium scale application, what before Redux, what I used to do when I was building apps was I used to have a tree of the state. By that I mean, for example, I have a blog. I will have one object which will say my application blog. In that application blog, I will have two other objects. One is the users, other one is the are the blogs. The blogs in the users, of course, there will be users which are connected to maybe my friends or whoever I want to show on the screen that these people are viewing. Maybe the users are only the current users which are watching the blogs. Whatever, depends on the application. The second part is that when you come to the blogs, is the comments on the blogs. In the blog, there will be multiple blogs which I will show on the screen. All this data will be, of course, coming from the server or being generated as we go along. And then on each blog, you will have comments. So therefore, it becomes a tree. And I used to manage it myself. This, even before React, even before anything, I started off developing in Java, then Silverlight, and spent a lot of time in different technologies. I used to do this. When I used to make a client, thick client, you're not talking about a web page, which is a thin client. Whenever we are talking about the thick client, in a thick client, the data is coming from the servers. We want uh, like a single page web app. Single page web app, React app is a thick client. This thin client, we are basically separating the view from the model, which is a pattern, MEC pattern, a model view controller. Of course, I don't want to go into model view controller at this stage because it will confuse you in the terminology. I don't want to confuse you, but the concept is the same. So therefore, in React, what we are doing is we have a tree of components. Of course, we can right now, after 16.8 React, we can basically build after the hooks and all the rest of the stuff that has come in. We can build an application Redux without Redux. But in medium scale as large apps, it will become very difficult to manage and very difficult to debug. So therefore, I'll suggest, irrespective of your technology, use these concepts. The good thing is, I used to develop the tree model myself, the state tree myself. Now we have a library, which is a very small library. But the problem is most people don't do it, therefore they get confused. We are going to spend the next one or two, three classes, let's see, on Redux because it's a very important part of the course, and most of the clients require Redux to be, because otherwise it becomes a number of people are working on a single application. Without Redux state management, it will be very difficult to debug who is doing what. Zishan, let's get started.
Okay, so as Sarja has mentioned that to properly manage state at the client side, we need a tool or a library so that state management becomes stable. The problem with manually built state management, or as Sarja has mentioned that he was creating a tree, or any other one is doing anything else to manage state on the client side. When you are doing state management by yourself, that means you are creating some different pattern yourself, and it is not being tested with the thousands of users. With these state management library like Redux, it is being used and tested by thousands and millions of users, and it is being used in thousands of applications. So it has been tested, and it has good features available. So you just don't need to as you doing it yourself. So you might be using a one or two, you might be creating a one or two features, but built-in library or the existing library will have many features. So you need to understand that creating state management by yourself will require a lot of effort and time, and Redux library will reduce that effort and time. So let me first share my screen. Okay. So for the Redux, we are going to use Redux toolkit, and in maybe today or in next class we'll look for the Mirage, and there is a new article being added in hour ago, I guess, and Sarja.
Yes, I just added because some people might not understand what are the three dots for copying objects.
I'll explain a bit about it so that they can understand.
Once we get to that point.
Yeah. Okay. No problem. And there are in this bootcamp link, Sarja has mentioned 3 articles: quick start, basic tutorial, and so these are the links which have been mentioned over there. First, you need to understand that Redux toolkit is not a Redux. Redux toolkit is built upon the Redux, because while working with the Redux, if you have already been you have previously worked on Redux or not, or if you are working as a new user on the Redux, the problem with Redux is it is independent of a pattern. So you can do anything as you feel like comfortable with. So you will be implementing in your ways. So there will be a different style, there will be a different pattern working on the application. There are multiple libraries to implement Redux: Redux Observable, Redux Thunk, Redux Saga. There are many libraries, but the most important part of Redux is it is not opinionated. You can do it however you want it, the way you want it. That creates a problem, because sometimes I do implement in different way, other one is working on a different way. We are working on the same Redux Thunk, but the style will be different. We'll be creating actions or not, we'll be using separate. I'll explain them separately. So what Redux toolkit did is, it is an opinionated library. It specify you how to use Redux. So you have a clear guideline, you have a clear information that how you can use Redux while working, how you can use Redux when you are working on a medium or large application. Another important thing is, you can do Redux management or state management, as Sarja mentioned, with a context API and use reducer hook, which we have covered in class 5 and 6. You can do that. But the problem again, context management API is not for the state management. It is for the global values which can be transferred for the whole application. So you must need to understand that Redux does a lot of things. And the important thing is, while I'll show you Redux toolkit, but first you need to understand how Redux works. So if you understand how Redux works, Redux toolkit is a very easy to understand, and there's a simple function to understand how Redux Toolkit is work. So what I'll do is I'll explain first you how Redux works. So these are the three application. Additionally, if you review this article, I'll post to Sarja so he can add. This article mention you how Redux was being used previously and how it is being used with functions, so you can understand Redux hook. So you can see the differences how it should work. Okay, so
Dishan, this article basically is before the toolkit or after the toolkit?
it does not consider the toolkit. It's just talk about the Redux with hooks, because toolkit is based on Redux. So
Uh-huh.
if you're using React Redux, toolkit is working on up about what you say. It's a working on above the Redux. So it's a wrapper. So you can use Redux more betterly. So it is not talking about the toolkit. It is just talking about the Redux, what Redux is, and then a toolkit gives you the opinionated feature, so how you should implement reducer action and that this and that. So what I'll do is I'll first explain you Redux, and toolkit
Mhm.
will what toolkit will do is it will ease your pain while working on the Redux.
Perfect.
Okay, so
Give me the so that I can add it.
sure. um, I'm adding in the comment as
Yes,
right.
yes.
Okay. So what I did is I have created two React applications. So once we learn React Redux with hooks, and then we'll use the toolkit. So it's a clean React application as we create with the Create React app. The only difference is I have added two libraries, Redux and React Redux. Yarn and Redux and React Redux. These two libraries I have added. And once we learn React toolkit, Redux toolkit, it will be another library above these libraries. So Yarn add Redux and React Redux. So this is how we. And one important thing, let me show this one first, then I'll the way React toolkit helps you is it reduce the code too much. It simplified to you. We were working, me and Sarzia have developed this Redux to library 4 years ago. And let me show you the code. It has too much of a code to work on a simple counter application. You need to manage state to props, you need to add dispatch prop. Once I'll explain the application, you will understand everything. You need to create, store, count actions, reducer, counter. All these things are still there, but Redux toolkit will simplify all these things. So if you are working a simple counter application, even then you need too much of a code to implement it. So we have done this 4 years back, me and Sarzia, and there were too much code, and initially it was quite difficult to understand how to work with Redux. So now let me move to the code. I have an app.js. So what we'll do is we'll again create a counter application, which will just add and remove counters, increase or decrease a variable. Okay, so let me create. Okay. Let me start the server. Meanwhile, I'm working on it. Yes. Now in counter application, what I'll do is first I'll show the counter, and this will be the counter. Another div. And I'll create two buttons over here. Increment will have concrete. I need to update a value on click. So what I'll do is I'll create use state. Counter, set counter. And whenever we click the increment, what I'll do is I'll update the set counter. These things we have done already, so you must understand what I'm doing. Okay, and this is increment button, and there is decrement button. So these are the two buttons, and it's just simple application. Next, what I'll do is I'll create an input type text. Change. We need to update its value on change. So what I'll do is set counter. I'll explain in a moment what actually it will do. So the first button, whenever we press this button, it will check the counter value +1 and value will increase. This decrement button.
Right now, everybody understand we are not doing anything now Redux. We are just doing it the old way.
We
have already got.
Implementing the component so that we can add Redux into it.
Yes.
Okay, so this counter variable, and it's a state, so it's local to this component. There will be no other component will be that might be using it. And another thing, I created the input variable. So increment decrement button will increase 1 and decrease 1. What I want to do is I want to increase with 5 or 10. So I'll get input value, and what I'll do is value comma set value. Now here, instead of using the counter, what I'll do is I'll use the set value. Speed.target value gets the value of the, and on the click of button, I'll do is I'll call the set counter and concatenate sum with the value. So whatever we type in input box, it will store in the value, and once we press the increment button, it will take that value and plus into the counter and update the state of a. And the problem with the value is it's in a text box, so what you need to convert it into the number. So I'm using the number conversion. So we have a problem here. Okay. Okay. So now currently we have a value of 12. Why we have a value of 12? It's a hard coded, so we don't need hard code value. So what we'll do is we'll use this counter variable. Okay. So as I'll press increment, decrement, and I'll provide value of 6, will move to 10. So that's the very simple. But what will happen is if I have another component. So as you can see in a Facebook, you have information of user at the top in the header bar. You have all your information, but your image, your name also available in your stream, in your page information, in your chat information. So the same information needs to be available in multiple component. So that's what Redux does is it creates stable, predictable state container, so that the state you update at one place, it should be updated in all the component. If you are doing it manually, so you will update, you will call update from all the components separately, and there will be no syncing. So in case of Redux, what Redux does is it helps you to keep the state at a central place, and all the component use it from that component. Okay, so that means if I create a component counter display.js, and I want to use now this is the same problem we have discussed in class 5 and 6, that we need to use it, we need to place value in the context API and then provide value with the props. So we are not going over there. I'm not showing that, but the problem exists that you have a state in one component and other component does not know about it. You cannot update another component. If you change the state, another component will not know. So we have used a context API, but context API should not be used for managing state at the medium to large application. So what we have to do is we have to move toward the Redux. So I have installed the libraries Redux and React Redux. So you can see those two libraries over here. Redux, React Redux, and Redux. So what we need to do is, what Redux does is Redux creates a store, and all your state stay in the store. So you access the store and update your component or whatever you want to do it. So what we'll do is first we're going to create a store in src. I'll create a folder, name store. I'll create a file inside it and I'll give it a name.
Right now, you are not. Right now, just be clear. You are not using the toolkit. You are just using pure Redux.
Pure Redux, and toolkit will eliminate a lot of boilerplate code. As let me just show. Sorry. What React toolkit says. Why we need a React configuration? Redux store is complicated. I have to add a lot of packages to get Redux to do anything useful. Redux required too much of a boilerplate code. So Redux toolkit solve these problems. So first, if you do not understand what is action, how action works, how reducer works, actually, you will not get. You will
understand
not be able
toolkit.
to understand the Redux toolkit. So that's why it's important to understand Redux first, and toolkit will eliminate. And Redux will be learning with the new hooks. So even in that state, it's a much lesser code we were writing previously with the class component. Even if you are not using toolkit, it's a much lesser code, but toolkit will do a magic. Okay, so I am in store.js file. What I'll do is export store equals to create store. And create store requires reducer, as we have learned in what you say, fifth or sixth class. Use reducer. That's the same reducer. I'll explain it. At this moment, we do not have reducer, so what I'll do, I'll pass null so that we can move forward with this. So I have create store. There can be multiple things over here. That's why I created a separate file. At this moment, we do not have anything else in this file, so we'll keep it as it is. And in index.js, we have learned context API. What context API do is you create a wrapper over your app so that anything you want in any of the component or sub-component will be available because of the context API. So in Redux case, in the case of Redux, we also have a provider which helps to store Redux. So what we will do is we'll create a provider which is directly available. So let me import it. Import provider from the Redux provider. So we are wrapping app component inside the provider so that anything we add in state level into the store, it's available in overall application. Now the provider needs a store. I don't know why it is compiled successfully. It should give you error. It requires a store. So what you need to do is you need to provide a store over here. And we have created a store in store.js. So this variable, we need it so that we can provide it here. Like we have in case of context, we have a value keyword and we provided the value. So store. Now we have created the store. Still reducer is missing. And we have wrap app component inside the store, inside the provider of a context. It is actually a context API, but it is related to the Redux as Redux team has implemented. So we have done with this store. Now what we need are two things: reducer and action. What action does is we create an in case of at this moment what we did is we are doing state management with use state, and we need to create a lot of functions. So if we have a two state, we need to do it use state two times. If we have a four states, we have to do it four times. So what reducer does is instead of calling uh, too many use state, what you need to do is you need to pass a message. You need to pass a message, and based on that message we work on the state, update state or delete state or return state, whatever we want to do. So in case of this, we are doing with the messages. So we need to create a message will be sent and reducer will work. So instead of creating reducer, first I am going to create how we will send the messages so that you can understand how it will work. Okay, now here comes the hooks of Redux that requires, because we need to pass a message, we need to send a message. In Redux, it is with the function called dispatch. For dispatch, Redux has provided us a use dispatch function. So what I'll do is const dispatch use. It's not directly available. use dispatch, and this dispatch is a function which pass message to the Redux store. So what I had to do, what I'll have to do is I'll have to call this dispatch function, and I need to send message. This dispatch function accept an object. So what I'll have to do is I'll have to create an object. This object, it depends on me how I want to use messaging. So it's completely depends on you. So what I'll do is I'll send type colon. That's a standard way you use the type to send a message, what type of state management you want to do. So you generally it is a standard practice to use a key as a type, and I'll mention the message as increment. Same I'll do with the dispatch. Type. Now, what this dispatch will do and where this message will go, that's what we need to understand first, so that once we create the reducer, you will understand that what this dispatch will do. So now we are going to create a reducer, and this message will pass on to the reducer, and reducer will update the state, and then it will update the store so that information available in your whole application. So now in store folder, I'm going to create a file name reducer. And reducer is a function we have, I guess we have learned to, in pretty much detail how reducer function is being built, but let me show it here again. Export const, let's say counter reducer equals round bracket. Now I'm creating an arrow function, and it accepts two properties, state and action. State is the state which is being updated or which is being used. Action is the something which will receive this information. Type increment. Action will receive this information. So based on this, we will update our state. Another important thing related to the reducer is it's a pure function. Pure function, what pure function means is, sorry, it does not update external state or variable. It does not update even an argument passed to it. It creates state or information or object inside that function. It does not affect, it's what you say, pure function does not have a side effect. It does not update any, does not access any external function, and does not change any external function, any external property. So in case here, what we'll do is we'll create a switch, because we need multiple type of state, multiple type of messages. We will be receiving multiple type of messages, and we'll be updating state based on that particular message. The switch is best for that. And we what type of message will be coming? So action dot type. Now you will understand this type, that here in counter, once we dispatch a message, this object will pass to the reducer over in this variable, and it has a type property. So when I'll press the increment button, it will receive information in a type property as increment. When I'll press the decrement button, it will pass the message in a type property as decrement. So these are the value we'll be receiving here. And then what we'll do is, what I'll do is, in simple counter application, they use directly a value inside the state, but you will miss the how object will work inside the reducer. So I'll enclose counter property inside an object. I'll show you how. So in case this is the reducer and this is the state, when this reducer updates, calls, or store creates the very first time, it needs an initial state. So what generally we do is we provide initial state as a default argument in the function. So this is how you do it. So what I'll do is const initial state equals, this is an object, and I'll say counter 0. So this is initial object. So instead of using direct value, I'm using an object, and that object has a property counter, so that we can understand how we are going to update object. And in case of the state, what we'll do is I'll pass initial state this way. So you need to understand that this function accepts two arguments, state and action. And what I'm saying is, as a default, you accept the initial state. So if we do not pass, actually we are not going to call this reducer function ourselves. Redux store is going to call this reducer function, and Redux store will pass the state. Initially state will be null. So this initial state object will be used. Second, third, and fourth time, what will happen is the current state will be passed by the Redux store. So you don't need to worry about the second and third stage. This will be used on the first time. Now, now what I'm saying is, I need to copy increment. If you call with the increment, then you do something, return something. We'll see. Case increment. We'll do something. Now, what you will do? This is where the spread operator comes in, because reducer function does not change any argument passed to it, does not change any external variable. So what reducer function has to do is use all the values from existing state and change them. So it's actually cloning. You need to clone the existing state and then update it, so that you do not update the existing object which is being passed to your function. To clone an object, it's called, spread operator is called basically expanding an object. So let me just instead of it showing here, what I have is, I have an user name Zishan, email abc@gmail.com. What I need to do is I need to copy every property from user. What I can do is I can do dot user. What it will do is it will copy name property, email property in the new user. If instead of creating this will create a reference. So what will happen is, if I'll change the new user role, it will also update the user. If I'll update the user, it will also update the new user. So we don't need a referencing, we need a copy of an object. So that's why that's not gonna work. We need to use this. Now I have copied every property from the user, and now I can change any property or add any other property. So I have copied name, email, and this will be very beneficial when you have a 10, 20, or even at 5 properties. So now what I need to do is I need to update the, it will first copy name in email because of this, then it will update the name property, and I can add age property with it. 24 is the right age.
That's too much.
Okay, so this is how you need to use the spread operator at the basic level. This is how. So we are going to use this spread operator. Copy our existing state and update it. So what I'll do is, this is object I have, dot 3 dot actually state, comma. Now I know that my state has counter property, so I need to update that property. So what I'll do is state dot counter colon state dot counter. +1. So in case of increment, it copies all the property. At this moment, we have only one, and it will update it. So it will not, it will not update existing state. It will not update any external. It will create a new object and it will return. And where it will return, the return value will go to the store. Will not use that directly. Store will use it. Same here. I'll use state and then counter state dot counter -1. These are the two properties. And if I need to send data with that dispatch, so we have another function which use, so what I'll do is I'll call dispatch and I'll send object. Generally, a standard way of sending a data is type, and I'll mention I have not added in here also, so I'll add over there also. Increment underscore by underscore amount and comma. I'll pass another property, the recommended or standard way of sending a data to dispatch so that reducer handle it is with the name payload. And you will pass what we need to send. We need to send this value, whatever we receive in input box, 5, 10 or 50, so that we update the state. So it is stored in set value, in value. So I'll send it over here, and of course it's text, so I need to. So this is how I'll send object inside the dispatch, and reducer will receive this object here. And what I need to do is I need to call case. I need to copy it. That's one more problem to handle, which Redux toolkit does. Return dot state counter state dot counter plus action dot payload. Now you need to understand that in case of counter application, we are sending direct value inside the payload. Otherwise, you can send an object inside a payload. So that's how you need to manage. It's depend on you. So you are sending an object inside the payload. At this moment, we don't need it. So I'll be sending only number and value. Okay. So that's what we'll send over there, and that value will reach over here. We'll not call this reducer directly. Store will call it, and store will pass value over here. So it will update the counter based on what is being mentioned in the payload. So this is our reducer. Switch case, which will increase the counter with 1, decrement, which will decrease the counter by 1, and increment by amount, which will use the data inside the action and update somehow. So that's how we are updating the counter, and this we are done with our reducer. Now what we need to do is we need to pass that reducer in store. So what I have exported it. Yes, export counter reducer. I just passed it, and that will be used in here as so that state and that reducer is being available to store. And whenever we pass any dispatch action, so store will call action related to it, call the reducer related to it. Okay, so we are done with the reducer, we are done with the store, and we are done with the dispatching. Now, final thing remains one. We have updated the store, but state remains in the store. So we need information from the store, not from this use state, because store is a central location and everybody will be updating that store. So what we need to do is we need to get data from the store. So for that we have, in case of Redux, we have a use selector. What it does is it returns now what use selector does is actually it requires a function. So and that function accepts a state. So I'm creating a function, and what it does is it receives state property. It's a function, and what I need to do is I need to return state dot counter. So here we will receive, I can name it ABC, but I'll name it counter. So when we call use selector, it is being called, the call will go to the store. Store will pass this function with this state, and we'll receive this counter and we will use this counter. So we have this counter over here. So now we'll comment this out. We have this counter value over here, and now set counter will not work because it was working for the local state. Now we don't need local state. Let's go to the application. Hopefully, oh, it's not working. So what else it says? Cannot read property counter. Number 9. Okay, counter state dot counter reducer. Okay, so I have to check what it is. It's undefined, so we are not receiving state. Okay, why we are not receiving state? Because yes, because we have not provided the default case of reducer. So we always need a default case. So that always return default state from here. So because when store starts, Redux store starts, it's called the reducer very first time, and it pass the state. If we are not using the default state, so it will return a null. That's why it was giving an error to us. Okay, now it's working. Now increment is seems to be same. There is no difference with the local state, but the major difference will be now in the display counter, which is a separate function, which is a separate component. In this component, I need value from the store. So what I'll have to do is very simply, I just need to call const counter equal to use selector. Okay, I need to do it separately. Use selector from again. We need to pass a function, and we should know what value we will be receiving, so that we can handle based on that, and we will be aware because of the reducer. We know we have a state object, and inside it we have a counter property. State, and then state dot counter. Now I just need to use that counter variable. Now you can see this in this we are working in counter component, and counter property is being used in display counters anywhere else in your application but on screen. So when you update that value, it also update the store. So all the component looking at the store. So if property gets updated, all the component receive this value. That's how you implement in Redux. It's a basic implementation, but it covers most of the thing except one which I'll show you in a moment. So let me show it once again, and then we'll move to the Redux toolkit. Once you understand this, Redux toolkit will be a breeze for you. Okay, so what we did.
What we are going to do is, I understand how the mind of a beginner developer works. And I suspect that to me, your presentation was very powerful, and it was very simple, and I understood it very well. But for a beginner developer, what I'll do is ask you questions, and we will go in baby steps, small steps. And we are not going to worry about how much time it will take. Maybe we'll just cover this portion today, because unless people understand Redux, going forward is useless.
Yeah, it's very important. Redux is very important if you need to implement a big or medium or large scale application with React.
Therefore, what we are going to do is do it very step by step. First of all, what libraries do we need to import in a Create React app application?
Redux and React Redux. So it's Redux and React Redux. These two libraries are required.
Okay, we are going to import, install them, which is usually by npmi,
yes,
npmi and
Yarn and Redux, and
you can do it with Yarn. Okay.
Yes.
You gave this command. Okay.
Yes.
Now we have installed it.
Because in live stream it takes too much time to install, so I have already created a project and installed this command. Nothing else.
Yes. Okay. Now let's go to the second stage. We are going to set up a provider.
Yes.
Just like we do in a context provider. Right now we are providing. The whole idea is that we have a centralized store where all the components are getting their data. And this store will have all the data related to this application. There's going to be a single store. There are not going to be multiple stores. We are going to use a single store, and in that store, all the data will be stored. Am I correct?
Yeah. Yes, because we need to create a central store. So all the component of application contact to that store and gets the updated value. And if any component is trying to update a particular state, so it update in a store, so that if any other component is using that state, so that component also gets updated. For example, you have updated your picture in Facebook, so your picture is being used at the top of in your header. In the streamline, whenever you are using a timeline, your picture is available there, in a comment, in your chat, and there are many places where your image is available on Facebook. So if you are working with the central store, you update the image URL at one place, all those components are being getting image from that particular location. So it's updated at one place, all the component will get updated.
Okay. Now the second step is create a store. We create we create a directory called store. In that directory, we have created a store.js, which is a very simple code. We have done nothing. Basically, we have created called the method create store,
Mm-hmm.
and which we imported from Redux, and we
Yeah.
passed in the counter reducer. Now,
Reducer.
counter reducer, what is counter reducer? In order
It's
to
a
have a store which is basically the event processor, we are basically configuring the events that will come inside the store, and we will update the store. That code we don't write, but
yes.
receiving the comments. Now there are some rules to building a reducer. What are those
Yes.
rules?
First and foremost important rule: the reducer function should be a pure function. Pure function, in a simple way, pure function does not have a side effect. That means pure function does not access any external variable, does not update any external variable. Even pure function does not update or change any variable or argument passed to its parameters. So the pure function should not do that. If pure function have to do changes in any of the thing, it has to clone it, copy it, and then update whatever that function needs to do, and then it will return the value.
Okay. Now this reducer, you have everybody has to understand. This reducer basically what it does is it you pass a state. Actually, we don't pass a state. This
Yeah.
reducer will be called by
Store.
the Redux.
Yes.
We will not call it. Our code will not call it. We will just call the dispatch and pass our action.
Yes.
The state will be provided by the Redux framework.
Yes.
And once we get this counter reducer, once we get this, we basically check what is the type of the reducer.
Yes.
So therefore, this implies, Zishan, can we have
Yes.
more than one reducer?
Yeah, there will be many reducer because your application will have a multiple features. So you will be using multiple reducers for your application, and then you will call the combined reducer. I can show you if we
Later,
if we
later, later. But the concept at this stage is that
yeah,
there can be multiple reducers, but right now we are only dealing with one reducer.
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
One
In
thing
that,
I need to
just go ahead.
understand the reducer function as it will be called by the Redux, and very at the very first time when Redux calls it, Redux will pass null over it, and there will be nothing as a default action which Redux passes, and this function will return something. That's why our application was initially was not working, because at the very first time we will be not receiving increment or decrement. So what it does is it will return default state, that will be our default value, and Redux store will hold that information. Whenever we call the dispatch function, dispatch, what Redux does is it calls the reducer, and it pass the state plus it pass the action what we receive, and calls it again. It In our case, if it is an increment, it will update and it will return state. Again, this function will return something, store will hold it as a state. So every time the store will get new updated state by calling this function.
Okay. Now this is being called by who is calling it? The framework.
Yes,
Uh,
Redux store.
okay. Now let's go back to the provider thing.
Provide
Let's go back to the store.
store. Yeah, okay, store.
This store basically is we are basically initializing it, create store for this reducer.
Yes.
And this reducer basically is the store has been created. Now we
Yeah.
want to mount it in the provider. Now let's go to the provider. We are now basically provider. We have loaded this store in this provider.
Yes. So we have imported store from our file, and in the provider, because it's being customly built by the Redux team, so it requires a key store, and it accepts the store object which we have created over here. So we have exported this store variable. So what will happen is we'll import it over here and pass it to the provider. So provider is a context API and it wraps the app component, and every component is inside the app component. So our application, the main starting or main viewing point of our application is app component. So we wrap that app component inside the provider. So whatever store has is available to all the component within the app component or the child of app component.
Okay. Now let's go to the component.
Okay, so now let's go to the counter component.
In the counter component, we have imported two things: use dispatch and use selector.
Yes. If
Use
anyone, sorry to interrupt. If anyone has used Redux with the class component, so it assume this, it's a map to dispatch props and it's a map to state prop, map state to props.
Okay. Now,
These,
and those people who have not done it, just forget about it.
yes,
Now, when we are going to update the store, we are going to use the use dispatch method.
Yes.
And when we are going to show the store, we are going to use the use selector. The first, let's send a message.
By using the use dispatch, we call use dispatch, so it will return us a function. Dispatch is a function. It returns us a single function name. I can name it anything, so you don't need to worry about it. So I can name it ABC, but because it's a dispatch function, so general standard or recommendation way of naming it as a dispatch. So in the button, on the click of button, increment button, what I'm doing is on click, we are calling the dispatch function and sending an object into it. And that object requires, that's how you want to do it. That's the problem, because it's not opinionated. So I can use the variable XYZ, key XYZ. So I need to manage it inside here XYZ. So I can do it in my way, but that will be a problem because it will not be standardized. That's why Redux Toolkit is opinionated and help you standardize everything. So you call the dispatch, and then you pass the object. That object requires any message which you need to send to the reducer. So whatever object we passed here, this object will go to the reducer in action variable. So this action is an object which is being passed from here in this dispatch.
Okay. Now these are now in order to update the UI, we need to use the use selector.
One more thing. If you need to send data with that, so you call dispatch and you can use I can use ABC. So I need to use in reducer ABC. So general standard payload, and you provide the value, and this will receive here as an action.payload, so that you can receive data from the UI component and update the state based on that. Okay.
Now you have done it. Now I think we have covered it. Just show the application once more, and then push the code on Git so that we can share the URL with everyone. And then
use selector is the main. So the last thing, we need to get the data from the store so that we can use it inside our component. This is the variable which is you say state. So whenever the store is being updated, this property will update it and your component will re-render this property. So you call it use selector, and use selector asks for a function. That function is being called by, again, store. We don't call it, we just create that function, and in that function we ask for the state, and inside this state we know we have a property counter, so we are accessing it, so it will return that property and we'll hold that property inside it. If we are returning an object, so we know this is an object and we can use that as an object.
Okay. Now we are done with it. Can you please push the code just so that we can get the URL?
Let me create repository first.
Learn Redux with React hooks, Redux hooks.
Okay. Don't need readme, create repository. Okay, so okay, so code is pushed.
Could you share the URL?
Yes, just a moment.
Also, put it on the comments.
Sure. If we have time, I need to show the action as a separate object so that because generally we call the action not in this way. Let me add
But
into.
we are today, because it's a very important class. What we are going
Yes,
to do is go over the time.
yes, sure. So I have posted in the comment, and do we have anything, or I can do go
Now
for the.
let's go for the second thing.
Okay. So what we are doing is we are sending this object, and we need to pass it as a string. Here is we are passing it as a string, and we need the same string in the reducer. So what generally we do is we create actions and objects separately, so that it does not we do not need to create or use the string and comparison. So what I'll do is I'll create a file name action, and in that file what I'll do is I export const increment. I'm creating a variable. Now the type of object we are passing over here, we will create a function so that we don't need to call it separately, because it depends, as we are working in a multiple developers, working with multiple developers. So what will happen is, if you have created an store, if you have created a reducer, if you have an action, another developer can do a typing mistake, will be passing something else, so you need it properly managed. So that's why we need to create a function. So that what I'll do is I'll create export const increment, and what I'll do is I'll be returning a simple. For increment and decrement, it seems it will be very simple. Very simply, I have created three variables, which has actually value, and I have created objects, so that if you see this object, curly bracket type increment is exactly similar to the curly bracket type increment. So I'll replace this object here. So once let me done with the increment by amount, and I'll receive value here. Number. I'm naming it number. So type will be increment by amount, and payload will be this number. So again, if you see this object, type and payload is exactly same as type and payload. So what I'll do is I'll replace this dispatch function with dispatch increment. So I have imported the action from increment here, and we'll call increment directly. So you will reduce the what you say errors because of incorrect spelling or incorrect passing of data. And if you're working with the TypeScript, so it will help more. As we have passed this number, so we'll pass the same object inside the function parameter. So this function will accept from here, and it will pass to the one thing. And now in reducer, because we need to reduce the spelling mistakes, so here what I'll do is, instead of calling this increment, I'll call the increment property created inside the action. So variables I have created will be used in action, so that it will be the same variable, and this same variable will be used in case matching of reducer, so there will be no spelling mistake or there will be no error. And this way what we'll have done is, we have just changed the how we call the dispatch. Otherwise everything is same, and our application should also, sorry, should also be working. Yes, it's working. And increment by value is not working. Payload. Okay, so increment by amount, accepted number, payload, increment by amount. The dispatch increment by amount. It returns type. Oh, that's variable mistake. It's increment by amount in capital. So that this variable should be used. What I was doing is I was using the function name. So definitely that's a mistake. So it's increasing by because action counter decrement dimension. So that's how, if you go for the copy paste programming, you need to put your mind also correct. Okay, so it's increment, decrement, then if you add value, so it's 18. So it's being updated this way. Now what you need to understand is we need to create actions, and these are three actions only for the counter, simple, plus, minus. If you are going to build a medium or large size application with the 10 or 20 features or use cases, you will be flooded with the actions, you will be flooded with the reducer, you will be flooded with the map to dispatch or the functions which we previously was using. So there'll be too much of a code. So toolkit will help you out to reduce that. It's not that there were no library available to reduce those boilerplate code, but again that was not opinionated. If you want to use it, you will use it. Now first time what Redux does is Redux provides the best practices in a single toolkit, so that you know that you will use it, and that's the how best practice is to work with the Redux. That's why it's much more beneficial to use.
Dishan, why do you go ahead and push the code, the latest code?
Okay, sure. Okay, so latest code also pushed, and you will see it here, updated action. So latest commit is also on the GitHub.
Now let's, if you have a few minutes, if you're not busy, let's just go over toolkit a little bit.
Sure, I love to. Okay, so for the toolkit, what we need to do is first we need to install the to use the toolkit. We have a two option: either create a React application with the template Redux. I'll not do that because it gives you the initial component. So I can show you that, but what we'll do is we'll create from the scratch. So you what you will, if you do create React application, that's just template Redux. So it will create a React application with React toolkit, and it you will see all these features, the store creation, all these things will be there from in start. Otherwise, what you will do is you will install React Redux, and you will install Redux.js toolkit. So then you can use it in your application. And how we are going to use it? We are going to, what's new in it? What's new in it? Now you guys will understand. It is saying the old way of creating. You create Redux, you create reducer, you call the create store, and you call the dispatch. This is the old way of working. The more typical, it says you create a variable, create actions. I showed just a moment ago. Create reducer, create a store, and then you call increment. That's how we are using it. The new way of the React toolkit, what Redux toolkit does is, instead of create a store, we have a new function named configure store. Create a store exists if you want to use directly. If you work with React toolkit, you call the configure store this way. Configure store, reducer, and counter, so that you're configuring a store. Generally, if I saw my previous applications, so we were also sending a store as a configure store function. So that was the standard, so they made it here. So you call the configure store instead of create a store. And to reduce the what you say, I have to create this object, action object. If you want to reduce this effort, so it gives you a function named create action. There was a library previously, other than Redux, some other library which provide the create actions, but React Toolkit does something more. Create action is, it was available previously. So what I did is, as we have seen, create increment variable, we have created the function which returns the object. This is how we create an action. What Redux Toolkit provides is, you call the create action, you pass the string, it returns you exactly this object, but you don't need to create it. It saves you time. So now you can call it increment new. So it saves you time for creating an action. In the same, it saves also this function, the object we receive also has a type property. So again, as I said, it is opinionated. So it says, if you want to compare with the inside the reducer equality, so you need to have a type property. So increment will be available in type. So it's specifically opinionated, said that you will have type property. So here you can see create action, increment, create action, decrement, and action dot type, increment dot type. You are comparing with increment dot type. So instead of creating your action, you will create your action in these two lines. Simple. Create reducer also changed, because in the current state, how we create a reducer, we call the switch case, then returns. In this case, what it does is, we call uh, we are creating a key increment dot type, so it will be increment. We are creating a key decrement dot type, and it will create. And the most important and beautiful thing about the Redux toolkit is, it is using a library called immer, because reducer needs a pure function. So you cannot manipulate state directly in reducer, as we have seen here. We need to update the state. But with if you are working with Redux toolkit, you don't need to worry about, just update this state. Redux toolkit behind the scene update that state as a separate, so it has a pure function at the behind the scene. You don't have to worry about, you just update the state. Redux toolkit will do the needful for the pure function, so you don't have to worry about, you just update the state. It will be doing cloning, updating the state separately, and then passing it to the store. So that's again one less headache. That's how you create a reducer. But these two things are available if you need to reduce a code. If you want to reduce a code too much, that's a great thing about Redux toolkit. Create slice. You don't need to create action separately, you don't need to create reducer separately, just create a slice. Create slice, give it a name, give it an initial state, and create a reducer. That reducer increment decrement is similar, which we have created here, or we have created here. It's exactly similar. So what it does is, with just this create slice, you will have reducer, you will have action. So you don't need to worry about. You just call the create slice dot action, create slice dot reducer, and you will have these values. Should I show that in the code, or we
If you're
should?
tired, depends on you.
I have time. I can do that.
Okay, then let's do it because
Oh,
it comes in a single class and it is beneficial for the students.
yes, definitely. So what I'll do is,
Create another project.
yeah, I have created another project and I have installed the two things in that project.
Some
One
people
is
are some people are a little bit confused on the number of two things before we get started. Number one is will there be more than one store? The whole idea is that you should have only one store. What do you think, Dishan?
yes, the whole idea is you should have only one store. You can create multiple store. Redux has the facility, but you should not if you are using a single store, so that whole your whole application should have a same state. So you should be have a single store.
The second thing is people are confused. Why don't we use context? Why use Redux?
Use context, basically, you need to understand that context API is not for the state management. It is for some global values you have available in your application and you can use your application. State management is something different. As you have seen here, we need to update the state, we need to change the state, and these are just a simple counter. If you have a user, you need to update the state, you need to update its value, you need to add courses. There can be hundred of features and hundred of requirements. You need to do it yourself because context API is not state management. So you need to do it. I have done this with the use context and use reducer. I can manage state of an application, but that application should be a very simple. If you guys saw the React bootcamp, this bootcamp expense tracker with the with the blockchain, I have done with the I have done I have used context API and use reducer to manage the state. You can do this, but that will be my pattern, and my pattern is not a standard pattern, and that can have a bugs. This pattern is being used by hundred and thousands of developer. It is being tested by hundred and thousands of developer, and best practice is being added over here. So that's the right way to implement, and it's being tested at thousands of time. So you should use this library. You can do it yourself with the context API, but you should use the built-in proper implemented library for such features, which is very important for your application.
Okay, let's go ahead.
Okay. So what I did is I created a create React app. I have not added the Redux. So I have not used this way of creating Redux application. Mm, no, I have not done this. I have just created the create React app and I have added toolkit separately. If you create this Redux with this template, it will give you the complete structure, which I'll show you at the end so that you get the idea how it works. So I have just created the create React app. Then I added the toolkit and React Redux. React Redux is also required for this because use dispatch, use selector are part of this library, not the toolkit library. Toolkit provide the configure, store, and other things. So this is yarn add React Redux and Redux.js toolkit. So I have both of these libraries in my this project, and this project is empty. It has nothing. Okay, what I'll do is I'll create a same components folder and I'll add the counter.js and counter display.js. I'm not implementing code at this moment because I need to these are two components, and what I need to do is I need to create a store. So let's in Sarsi, I need to create a folder first, store, and then store.js. In this store.js, what we have done previously is we have called the create store. Now what we need to do is we need to call the configure store. We need to import it. I don't know why these Redux libraries does not provide IntelliSense for the import initial properties. Read this toolkit. Configure a store and it requires object. Inside that object, we pass the reducer. And instead of providing reducer directly over here, what I'll do is I'll create this. And here I'll pass the reducer. I'll show you reducer in a moment. Okay, why I'm doing is so that I can add multiple reducer. So we can do multiple reducer. That's why I have created this so that you can understand that we can have multiple reducer. That's the reducer, and we need to pass reducer over here. So I have created this store. Now, instead of working for the counter, what I'll do is I'll directly go for the toolkit, and I'll create action reducer so that we have the Redux code. But before that, I need to use provider. So provider is exactly similar here. Again, I need to import same from the what we have done in previous example. Import from the React Redux provider. Store, and I need a store. Okay, so the store we have created is being passed here. So that's exactly similar which we have done in the previous example. So there is no difference. Now we need reducer. So what I'll do is I'll go directly for the slice. Create slice, because using the create action and create reducer will not help you much the way create slice will help you. So what I'll do is, so we don't need to create separate actions, we don't need to create separate reducer. What we have to do is just go and create counter slice.js. Here the counter slice, what I need to do is I need to export it actually, so that counter slice and call the create slice. So export const counter slice equals to create slice, and create slice requires an object. First property of that object is name. So what you want to name it? So I want to name it counter Initial state. What initial state you need? I need initial state, and that state should have a value count 0. And now the reducer. So I need to create reducer. Now you can imagine that what we had to do previously is to create reducer with all these properties, all these things. We need to create action. Here we just need to create increment okay. And here what I'm going to do, I don't need to return anything. I just need to update. I just need to see it again. I forgot. Yeah, we need to pass the state object. So we'll receive state property. What we need to do is simply just state dot count, sorry. Now we need to increase that value. We have two possibilities: state dot count plus 1 or plus equal to 1. That's the two ways. Okay.
Or we can just say plus plus.
State dot count. Yes, we can say plus plus. Yes, we can say plus plus.
Because we can now, you don't have to be immutable.
Yeah, definitely. That's the good thing about the toolkit. It handles that immutability behind the scene. It is immutable, but it's being handled by the toolkit behind the scene. Now, in this case, we need state and action both. So what I'll do is I'll call this function like state comma action. Okay, now state dot count plus equal to action dot payload. Sorry. Again, let's go to the old reducer. Switch, case, return, update state, then all these things are what you say. It's just a short code, and you can see increment state. And as we were using action, initial state and action both for every case. In this case, what we need to do is whenever we require the action, we use the action. If we don't require the action, so in this case, we have created the reducer as well as actions. So we don't need to create these actions separately. We are done with it. And we are done with the implementation of Redux store for the counter. That's done. Now, what we need to do is we need a counter. For the counter, what I'll do is I'll copy the counter code over here, because everything will be same except for few things. So I will remove those few things, or let me remove everything so that I can show. No, you need to see this because the use dispatch will stay the same, use selector will stay the same, call of dispatch will stay the same. Everything in this will stay the same as we have done with the without toolkit. What the change we will have is in the counter slice we have reducer and action. So we need to export that reducer and action. Export const increment, decrement, increment by amount from where? Counter slice dot action. Counter slice dot action will have these three functions and it will work similarly as they work here. So it will be the same. And we don't need to create them separately. That's the good thing.
But
Export.
you created them in the reducers. How
Yeah,
did they
basically,
become?
I have created the reducer. I have named it. So the reducer in action is done with the same code. So you don't need to create it separately. You just
That,
create the
the
function.
framework is creating it in the
Yeah,
create
it's
slice,
doing it
in
for
the
us.
create slice method.
Yes. And now the reducer, uh, what you have. So we will, I guess we need to name it. Let me just verify it. Counter slash dot reducer. Okay, so what I'll do is
I think it was reducers.
okay. I guess I'll verify this when I'll face the problem. Otherwise, we need to export as a default so it does not create a problem. I'll see what we need to name it. I guess I need to name it counter. I'll show you in a while. So, okay, so we have a reducer, we have a action, and now what I'll do is in store I need reducer here. So I'll call the reducer from counter slice, and we are done with the reducer here. In counter, what I need to do, I just need to use them. Just call the dispatch, and instead of increment, it's at this moment it's increment. I have not created this increment. I just created the increment this function. So action will be same and reducer will stay the same. So framework is creating all these functions for us. Okay. So now let me start this application. So if you see, I have just created the counter slice, the reducer action, it's all in, and it is opinionated. So whatever data you will be passing, it will receive in payload. Whatever data you will be using, it will, what you say, your type always will be the, where it is. Um, state And action will always be a type, so you don't need to use over here. App component, and I have not used the counter inside the app component, so let me call the counter over here and counter display. Actually, we have not created counter display also. Let me show first counters. Okay, so we have a problem over here, and that problem is definitely because of the reducer, the naming of the reducer, not valid reducer. Okay, so just let me check again. Reducer, it's not reducers, it's reducer. Favorite point, import reducer is not exported. Okay. Store, we are trying to import that reducer. Okay. Store does not have valid reducer. Make sure argument passed to combine reducer is an object whose view is reducer. Okay. Increment. I have used counter and reducer. Okay. So I have changed it a bit because of uh, so what you can do is counter. I guess there is some problem. Just a moment. Okay, so let me go to the its default implementation which it provides. So I just need to verify reducer state and counter slice dot reducer. We created, and we need to return counter slice dot reducer, and we need to use it inside the store as counter reducer. Okay, so counter slice dot reducer is the same, just need to export default. Okay, so for default counter slice dot reducer as it is done over there on that application, and reducer. Okay, so in store I need to import reducer, counter reducer. That's something. Just counter slice.
There is a spelling mistake. It doesn't matter, but it doesn't look nice.
Where?
In the last reducer, DUCER, RE. You missed the RE.
Okay. Okay, so another problem. Object Wilcom is not a valid child, requires key div. Okay. Okay, so basically the problem, let me just test it so that I can comment on the problem. Yes, it's working. So the problem was basically there is a small change when I implemented the reducer. I named it counter and then provide the reducer. So while using that reducer, previously I was just using state.counter because this was simple counter reducer coming. Now it has a name so that if we have a multiple reducer, so what we do is state.counter.count, and that's provided over here. You see initial state and the name is count, and in here state.count in all these cases. So, and then in the store, what I did is inside the reducer, I provided a key counter and reducer. So, how you this in state will be available to other object is state dot counter dot whatever state in that counter is. So, in our case, state dot counter dot count. There, if there will be another slice for user slice, then we'll name it something like. User colon user reducer, just an example. So the information inside the user will be available state.user.name, state.user.age. That's how you will access the property. So that was the real problem over there. So other than that, counter of component will remain the same. It just need to call the actions from the slice. Otherwise, whatever we have done in previous example will remain the same. We call the use dispatch. To access the data, we call the use selector. It will also remains the same. The big difference is how we call create action and reducer. So we use create slice, we give it a name, we create initial state, and then whatever actions we need to take, increment, decrement, whatever. So for the increment, we call a function, and again, it does the immutability work outside behind the scene. So you don't need to worry about the updating, cloning the state. You just update the state. So I just update the state for the increment, update the state for decrement, and for the increment by account action dot payload. So if you see, there is no action function in counter. I am calling the increment and I'm passing a value inside it. This value directly will be received inside action.payload. So it's specified that you will receive value inside the payload. Then you increase and you send the actions, export the actions, export the reducer, use that reducer inside the store. The only difference is you call the configure store. That's the simplification of the Redux toolkit.
Nishant, why don't you push this code so that it
Just
comes on record?
just a moment. I need to create another repository.
No, with the Redux toolkit, React, remove the React in between.
Sure. In this case, let me post the URL and comment as well. Yes.
I'm copying all the URLs to our website.
Sure. Okay. So it is being pushed and it's done. You can see over here. Now the code is pushed and you can see this. The just one more time. The basic things you need to understand how Redux work. The action, the reducer, the store, and how these things works behind the scene. Once you understand this, React toolkit, Redux toolkit is just a big help to reduce the code because you need too much of a boilerplate to create actions, to create reducer, to combine them. So, and again, these code reducers or the libraries such exist previously, but now React toolkit is part of Redux now and it is opinionated, so it provides you best practices how you should work with the Redux. So instead of using your own terminologies, your own style, you just need to create your application the way React toolkit tells you. Now, last thing is if you create the Redux create a application with template Redux, so what it will does is it create. I have not changed it. It just as it is. It is the structure it provides. So you see SRC. It has app and feature folder. You see index, this provider. It's already been there, so you don't need to create the provider, create the store. Everything is already there. The store will be in store app folder, and the configure store counter reducer, it has the same name. In feature you have a counter and you have a counter slice, so it has already been created. Initial state, increment, decrement, increment by amount, and all these functions are similar. The one we have not discussed is the async function. So I'll if we get time, we'll show you it's sometime in next class, or it's a simple. You don't need to worry about it. Whenever you need to create async function, so you need to call function like this. The selector and the reducer. This example use selector over here. I have called the selector directly. So use selector, use dispatch, and everything is same.
One of our teachers, Bashir, just sent me a message from America on WhatsApp. So when I grow up, I would like to be Zishan.
It's so nice of him. Thank you. Okay, so I guess that's it. We need to add anything?
We don't need to add anything. Next time, see you guys. We will continue with. We will go towards Redux projects, and also we will cover on how to make a mocking server, because right now we are not calling any APIs to update Redux. So what we need is we need to create a mock server. Otherwise, we will have to create the server, complete server, which takes a lot of time. And usually front-end developers sometimes don't do it. They don't have the contract to do it. So therefore, what we are going to learn is how to create a mocking server. Daniel Nagori is going to teach that, and Adil is going to cover the, what do you call, the projects. But what
Yes.
Zishan is going to do is review what else he needs to cover in the next class, and he will also basically connect with this thing, toolkit and everything with the mocking server
Okay.
as well. Thanks a lot. See you guys in the next class. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Sorry for being 45 minutes. But
That's really important.
I
That's really
thought, I know Zishan is a very gifted developer and one of the best in Pakistan and one of the top developers in the world. So therefore, I knew that once he is in a role, it will be very stupid of me to disturb him and to basically.
And it connects. So if we would break the before the toolkit, so we need to call them again. Need to provide them the background again. So it's good that we have done it in one go.
Okay, thank you. Khuda Hafiz. Bye bye.
Bye everyone.